Hello, and welcome to CACHE, the portable professional development podcast from CACHE. Thanks for joining us. My name's Dawn, and I'm the editor of CACHE Alumni. The conversation for this episode was recorded before the current extraordinary circumstances arose, but we thought it was important to still put it out, especially because there's some stuff in here that might be really helpful for people at the moment. So without further ado,
But if maybe starting with Shawna and then moving on to Andrew, you could both tell me a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do, that would be wonderful, please.
So my name is Shawna. I teach in a early childhood education diploma and an honors 4-year Bachelor of Child Development degree at Seneca College in Ontario, Canada. My background is a mix of working in early childhood education as well as working in intensive services mental health intervention. I am a registered early childhood educator and hold a master's in early childhood studies and a PhD in educational psychology.
Excellent, thanks. And how about you, Andrew?
How do I follow that? I'm Andrew Freeman, and I'm an implementation consultant for CCC UK. So my role is to support organisations and agencies that are delivering CCC to help implement it within their systems and processes to essentially ensure that those local authorities, those commissioners get value for money, but also sustainability. So what is being delivered is delivered in a focused and organisational sort of focused way. My background is quite varied. I've worked within children and family services for probably around 15 years now. Started off in community development, but that soon kind of went into youth work and then children's services within local authority and independent sort of sectors. So I've worked in local authority as a parenting development manager, which was a very grand title as part of the Parenting Early Intervention Project. Within a local authority in the southwest, then went to work within early years and early years policy within children's centres, again within a local authority in the southwest of England, and then went into a slightly different area, which was around working with family support services, particularly around family assessment centres. So I was an Ofsted registered manager for a family assessment centre for a number of years, and then went on to work for another independent provider and managed a range of services from alternative education, special education needs and disabilities, contact services, and then came full circle and went to CCC, which is where it all started in my first role as parenting development manager. So a bit of a full circle journey, but a good one nonetheless.
Wow, so between you both have an absolute world of experience in sort of children and young people and behaviour and all of the things that sort of bring you both together with CCC. That's amazing. What is it that sort of makes you want to do the things that you do now? Is there anything in particular that sort of spurs you on when it comes to that career bit and why you've chosen to work in the area that you've chosen to work in?
For me, I think it's I personally found it the most rewarding job to sort of be in when you're working directly with people. And so sort of when I first embarked on my career, if you liked, it was very kind of working directly with families, working directly with young people, and just seeing the differences that they can make and work towards is just the most fulfilling thing, really. And to be able to sort of then take that experience and apply it in different settings in different organisations is just something that's really appealed to me. I sort of have an interest, so in terms of my sort of academic background, if you like, I did a master's in professional development, which focused on leadership and management within children's services, and so for me, I think the thing that really holds true for me is to keep those service users, the children, the families, the parents that we're supporting at the centre of everything that we do, and so that's just very, very sort of dear to me, really.
That's great, and that's Shawna, you wrote an article for CACHE Alumni about sort of how you ended up working within childhood education, from your background as a parent and some of the experiences that you had as a parent, is that still something that drives you in terms of your current role and the things that you do within early childhood?
Yes, absolutely. As per the article, I didn't intend to get into this sector at all initially. I had trained to be an air traffic controller, which sounds not so different from navigating an early learning classroom sometimes, and complexities of that. But I got into this sector actually because my son was struggling in school behaviorally, and we were not experiencing those challenges at home, which I know is often something when parents are saying we don't see it at home. That can be a disconnect sometimes between home and school. And I really was trying to help advocate for his needs in school to try and figure out what was going on differently there. And I was not really feeling very heard, I guess is the best way to say it. And so I ended up feeling like if I didn't have a child development background formally, I did not have the ability to be able to advocate for him in the depth that I was looking to do. And so I saw an advertisement for an early childhood education apprenticeship program, actually, and returned to school to study ECE. And what I realized through my studies was that he wasn't the only child that was struggling in early learning environments. And then I went on and studied some more and realized that the educators were struggling supporting the children that were struggling. And then as I continued to further my education and my work experience, I saw this whole systemic challenge where even people in pre-service education who are trying to get the credentials to work in early learning and care often don't know how to respond when they're experiencing behavior that's difficult. And so I can really see it as full circle. So my interest is really in supporting educators, in supporting the children to have positive experiences in early learning.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. And you've both mentioned sort of that continuous professional development piece there. So obviously, Andrew, you've got a master's degree in continuous professional development, which obviously in and of itself is a piece of continuous professional development. And Shawna, you've gone on from being a parent and having no early years education qualifications to now being a doctor within that realm. What do you think it is that makes you both so interested in growing your knowledge and progressing within this sector? What is it that you think is so important about continuing to grow your skills and your knowledge?
For me, I think I really realized I didn't know when I was first starting into the sector how much there was to know. And so it was really eye-opening to realize just how much vast knowledge there is to continue to stay on top of, and how quickly that can be changing. You know, even if you think about in early learning, our understanding of brain development in the last decade has just grown exponentially. And so I recognize that I have a moral and ethical obligation to maintain currency in my knowledge if I'm going to do right by these children.
Yeah, no, I think the same for me, really, in terms of echoing Shawna's comments. And I think as well that you know, we as human nature, we continue to learn and evolve and develop. And so the field within which we work is certainly no different. And I think there's also a kind of an added sort of dynamic, if you like, in terms of the context within which we work, whether that be sort of an organisational or a political sort of environment, that things don't stay the same. And as Shawna says, we have that sort of ethical, moral sort of commitment to continue to keep learning as professionals, but also on a personal level, to ensure the best possible outcomes for those that we're working with.
Brilliant, thank you. And again, you've sort of both touched on the same thing there in terms of not knowing how much there is to know until you figure it out. So Shawna, you specifically mentioned children's brain development and how much we've learned sort of over the last 10 years really in terms of the neurology of child brain development and that sort of neuroscience piece. So CACHE have just launched some neuroscience early years education qualifications, and that's obviously really popular at the minute, is sort of looking more at the science behind how children learn and how their brains develop and how we can best support that within early childhood education. And I know that that's something that you both look at quite closely in terms of the programs that Triple P run. Do you think that not knowing what there is to know is one of the things that stops people getting help either with their practice or with their parenting? Because in a lot of society, childcare is still thought of as being something that's really easy and sort of second nature to people.
I agree with you that a lot of times people don't realize how complex the job is. I often will say that early childhood educators are literally building brains and have dedicated a career to that. And so when people don't recognize care and education as so intricately entwined, it can be difficult to know what needs to be known. In my experience, sometimes even when people are valuing and respecting all that there is to know, when things are difficult, it can start to feel like they've tried and done everything that they're aware of, and particularly if they're drawing from colleagues and they're asking colleagues, what can I do in this situation? And people feel at a loss. It can feel overwhelming in feeling like there's nothing to do. And so I think sometimes that becomes a barrier as well, when people feel like they've done everything that there is and don't recognize that there might be some alternatives that just need to be fine-tuned or tried differently.
And do you think the same is true of parents?
I remember when I was first appointed as the parenting development manager within the local authority within which I worked, and the kind of internal terminology around that was the parenting expert. And I was absolutely petrified by that term because I'd literally just become a parent for the first time myself, and yet I was being sort of muted as the parenting expert within that local authority area. And I think that the job, the role of being a parent is that, there's no job description. It's an incredibly daunting, scary, rewarding, fulfilling sort of task. And when you take all of those kind of complexities and emotions, it's impossible to know everything that you might need to know. And it's only when that you as a parent would reach a crossroads or a crisis point or something where you need that additional support, it's only then that you realise that you need it. And not knowing where to look or knowing where to look is incredibly scary. And I think absolutely that sometimes that there is the myth out there that if you need or are identified as needing, or you request some kind of parenting support or advice, no matter how sort of big or small, then that's a negative thing. And one of the things that certainly within our professional lives, working with Triple P, is something around that actually it's okay to ask for support, it's okay to receive it, it's okay to be identified for it, and it's about dispelling the myth that's a negative connotation, because we all need help and support. I play quite a lot of sport, and I'm by no means the best sportsman. I need lots of help and support in my training and all of that kind of thing, and parenting is no different to anything else.
Yeah. Did you have anything to add to that,
Shawna? Yeah. It just made me think. I think you're absolutely right, Andrew. And one of the things that I see is sort of complicating this within the early learning professional is that these are professionals who have often had extensive training related to child development and supporting children in a early learning and care context. And so sometimes there can be a stigma or an embarrassment or a shame to feel like they're wanting to draw on new learning or new supports or resources, because there's, as you mentioned before, the sector itself isn't always widely respected, and so we're constantly advocating for this high level of respect for the hard work that we're doing. But at the same time, if you're struggling, you feel vulnerable to admit that you're struggling, and so that can be at a disconnect a lot of times, to kind of allow yourself to access that resource or those supports, and not undermine the expertise and knowledge that you do have.
Excellent, thanks. Again, we're both talking about practitioners and parents and asking for help, which is great. Obviously, sometimes that's one and the same person, and it might be that there's a practitioner who is excellent within the workplace and dealing with children that they've got that sort of practitioner-child relationship with, but they may struggle with building a relationship with those parents to offer support. Equally, I've come across practitioners who are incredible practitioners and have an excellent relationship with all of the children that they work with professionally, but who are really struggling with some issues with their own children, that because they're a practitioner who is lauded as being brilliant at their job working with children, it can almost be more difficult to ask for help when it's their own child, because it feels like a professional failing that your own children aren't doing as they're told, or acting in the way that you would expect them to in different situations. Do you feel that there are things that people can do, or that there are interventions that people can make, either to work more closely with parents as practitioners, or to seek support as parents when you are a practitioner who maybe needs a little bit more help at home? Who wants to go first?
I think as a sort of, if I put my sort of practitioner sort of hat on, one of the key things is that the parent is the expert for their own child, and that that absolutely in that there can always be a situation where that sort of professional life and personal life sort of collide, and so that kind of being an expert in your own child doesn't quite fit what you're doing professionally when you're working within the early years and working within those settings. And I think absolutely, I think certainly in terms of as I say, as a practitioner, when I've sort of provided parenting support myself, it's about kind of allowing the sort of parents to actually kind of reflect on themselves as parents and not as professionals, and almost having that space and that time to make that distinction, and beginning to really kind of understand what it is that the issues that they might be having, and understanding what that might be. But yeah, I think there's always that kind of pressure, and I suppose, using my own personal example of kind of being labelled the parenting expert within the local authority within which I work, but then going home and thinking, oh my goodness, how do I get my baby to sleep and bed and all of those kind of things? It can really sort of be quite a sort of an internal challenge for you. And I think what I've learned is kind of being able to have that sort of time to reflect and kind of take stock of that situation.
I agree, and I don't know, you'd asked about intervention, so I don't know if this is appropriate to say, so please cut me off if it's not. One of the things that I've seen in the research I've been doing on the PEACE program is, well, a couple of things that are related to what you're talking about. Staff talking about a stronger relationship and more relying on parents as co-resources rather than feeling like they're doing this alone. So I think that was really good. But in terms of the professional who is also a parent, one of the things that came out from quite a few participants in the studies is that they initially were feeling very frustrated. They would hold it all together in their work environment, and then they would go home and, by their words, say, and then their kid would have it, because they were so overwhelmed and so stressed at work that they were frustrated when they were coming home. And what they reported then after using the PEACE program is that they actually were finding resources and identifying some of the traps that they were falling into, not just at work, but also at, but also at home. And it helped them to feel more confident in their own parenting and more relaxed, and that they found an added benefit both at home and professionally.
Thanks. And do you think that that's important for practitioners to sort of put themselves into the shoes of a parent, and reflect that actually even parents who are excellent and know all of the things about child development and can fall into those pitfalls and can struggle, because there is a relationship to be maintained there and a sort of a will to not have your children hate you, and to do all of the different things that you want to do together. Do you think that there is that sort of knowledge versus reality in terms of being a parent and a practitioner?
I don't know that there's always a strong disconnect there. I think about practitioners who don't have children, and I have observed them often be very empathetic to the plight of the parent. And so I think it's really about having realistic expectations in either environment. And part of those realistic expectations is looking at, what is your own experience in this context, but what might be the experience of others. And I think that can play out whether it's with parents. I talked about myself where my son was struggling in school, but he really was not struggling at home. So when the school was trying to give me resources for home, we didn't have 30 children in our home and in our living room. So it didn't feel appropriate. And so I think if people can recognize the context that they're in and what resources are available to them there, then that can also help.
We're talking a little bit about issues with parenting. In the UK recently, there was a TV show on Channel 4 that was aired called Train Your Baby Like a Dog. And there was a lot of controversy around that because obviously we don't believe that behaviour is something that we should train out of children. It's something that we should address because behaviour is communication. It's that child telling us that something is wrong. How do you work with that? What is your understanding of behaviour and how children are using that to communicate? Is it something that we should just tell them to stop doing and get on with? Or is it an indicator of something bigger?
I think for me, it's exactly what you said around how they communicate. I think I don't see behavior as either good or bad. It just is a function of communication. And sometimes the way children behave can be difficult for others, but I don't align with the term bad child behavior or difficult behavior. It's difficult for the other person, not for the child. They're communicating in the best way that they know how. So I think a big part around child guidance and teaching self-regulation and building self-confidence and efficacy relates to helping the children strengthen their ways of communication in ways that may be more appropriate for different contexts or different settings.
And I know exactly the program that you're talking about, and I can only agree with Shawna. And I think that all behaviour is a way of communication. And I think what was equally worrying was the kind of principle that actually there's no sense of kind of reflection, self-regulation on the part of the parent and or the practitioner in those circumstances as well. So I can only agree with Shawna there.
Yeah, and actually that's a really interesting point, Andrew, that there needs to be an element of self-awareness or self-regulation on behalf of that parent or that practitioner as well, because their behaviour will inform how that child then responds or behaves, because you are communicating with that child also. Is that something that there is support for parents in terms of understanding a little bit more about their own parenting style or how they are interacting with their child, or the sort of general sense of who they are that they're communicating when they are talking to their own children?
It's certainly in terms of the work that Triple P does and the programs within which we provide to work with parents and support parents. It's kind of providing opportunities for those parents to reflect on their own sort of approach to parenting, look at kind of their own thoughts and feelings and kind of what they can contribute to that parenting situation as well. And I think Shawna mentioned there sort of self-efficacy, personal agency, all of those things are the kind of the underpinning principles of Triple P, along with minimal sufficiency and personal regulation and kind of being able to sort of manage how their approach can have an effect on a situation, whether that's a child's behaviour or otherwise, and absolutely. And I think probably the sort of comment that I made sort of earlier on is around kind of that parent knows their child the best, and as Shawna's kind of alluded to with their own personal circumstance, it's being able to have the opportunity to kind of reflect on what that means for them in the context within which they're in. So yeah, no, absolutely, and I think it's just it's just really important to recognise that behaviour is a way of communication, and as you say, Dawn, that the way that's responded to is communication back, and being able to understand kind of that the part that a parent or an early years practitioner can have in terms of that personal, social, emotional development of that young person is really critical and important in terms of managing those situations, being in those situations.
Great. And would you say the same sort of thing's true for practitioners, Shawna, in that the communication style of a practitioner, whether they're working with parents or they're working with children or they're working sort of with other practitioners to share their knowledge, that self-regulation piece is as important as teaching children how to self-regulate, so that you're aware of sort of your own hang-ups and communication issues in order to make those interactions as positive as possible.
Absolutely. I feel like a lot of times sometimes professionals don't realize how significant their behaviors are in contributing to behaviors that they find challenging. And so, whether it's something very simple from trying to organize the children to go outside and have, all their jacket and their hat and sunscreen or whatever on, and they're trying to coordinate this whole group of children to go, and then they're finally all ready, and then they say, okay, just wait while I grab my coat. Something that simple where they're expecting the children to perform a certain way, but then they're not modeling it the same, can be a very mixed message for the children. And so I think it does require the educator to be aware of their own how they're regulating themselves in order to promote that regulation for others as well. You see often educators, when they're seeking supports or when they're talking about what's happening in the classroom, sometimes they talk about things from a language of, trying to control the classroom or classroom management, things like that. And that goes against the grain of self-regulation and building that self-regulation within children. And so I think if the educators are using language as, we need to learn some classroom management strategies or child behavior guidance, those types of strategies, and don't recognize that even just the mindset of managing the classroom versus helping to teach the child to manage themselves or regulate themselves, that can be a huge barrier before they've even started any strategies.
And do you think that that's a way that sort of to change that mindset? Because one of the arguments that we hear a lot in terms of not being able to necessarily serve the needs of each individual child is that when you've got a class of 30, you can't deal with children sort of individually. There has to be some sort of classroom management to work with that class size of 30 people. Do you think that it's a little bit of a change of the mindset and looking really at practitioner first and the self-regulation and therefore co-regulation of that practitioner and group of children that can negate that a little bit, because actually it shouldn't be about individually dealing with each child's issues. It should be about that practitioner modelling that correct behaviour and making sure that they're sort of looking after themselves and not getting to the end of their tether, and being that calming influence in general.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a dance, really, isn't it? Where having the ability to individualize the program for the children in a way that's meaningful for each of them, as well as looking at the group of children as a whole. And I do believe that it does start with the practitioner and being aware of what they do have control over and what they don't. The one thing that they do have control over or could work towards is their own self-regulation and how they're viewing and perceiving children and the circumstances that are had. The research will indicate that when educators are feeling flustered or overwhelmed, or that they can't meet those needs of children when there's complex, whether it's developmental or behavioral concerns, they actually start to respond in more adverse ways and are starting to use strategies that are counterproductive. And so we really need to start with changing the way that they're perceiving those children and those experiences. And then from there, looking at how to be able to individualize within that group context. So you mentioned about 30 children, and the literature will indicate, and this is true for parents as well, where as little as 5 to 10 minutes quality one-on-one time during a day can make drastic differences to the behavior that they're experiencing as negative, and help the children to be able to self-regulate and communicate in a more effective way. And so thinking about the average day in an early learning setting where the staff have maybe 8 hours and there's many, many things to accomplish in that 8 hours, is there a way to tag off with a team member so that they can dedicate 5 minutes one-on-one, particularly with those children with those children who are maybe experiencing some challenges in the classroom. And when you think about how much time is often spent managing misbehavior, for lack of better word, just putting 5 or 10 minutes preventatively into that quality time with the children can make a huge shift to how the time is spent in the long run.
Excellent. And this all sounds really simple. It all sounds like proper common sense stuff, but obviously I'm very aware that it is actually much more complicated than it sounds to make changes like that, because there is a system, there is a sort of an established way of doing things to fight against. In your experience, Andrew, in terms of putting programs into place within settings, within local authorities, within groups of people, what are the challenges that people tend to come across when they're trying to change an approach to something rather than just the result?
I think that there's a couple of things really. There's the traditional kind of, this is the way that it's always been, and then for always shall. And also I think particularly within the early years sector, pressures around sort of staffing and staff within early years settings, and consistency. So I think all of the things that Shawna was just talking about there in terms of providing that quality time, preventative time, if you like, to children within those early years settings, is really valuable and really valuably done if it's with consistency as well. So the child's own key worker or sort of nominated member of staff, so that there's that consistency across the day. And I think within certainly the organisations and settings that I'm working with, that there is a challenge in terms of kind of managing sort of staff turnover, staff sickness, and all of those things, and the effect that can have on children. And I think there's also that willingness to as I alluded to at the beginning, there's that willingness to kind of look at things differently, try things a bit differently, try different ways, see what works, see what doesn't work. And I think it's about kind of, certainly in terms of my role as an implementation consultant, it's around facilitating those members of staff, those practitioners, those educators, and those parents to kind of begin to sort of think about, if I, what are the things that we're wanting to achieve, and how could we, what part could I play in sort of achieving that? And so I think it's about sort of facilitating that conversation and beginning to understand what is it that you need, what is it that you want to get from this process, from this program, and sort of that support being self-directed. And I think being able to sort of facilitate that can obviously means that it's kind of needs-led, and that actually within the organisations which I'm working, they're beginning to sort of identify what it is that they want and how they want to solve some of those problems or issues that they're facing as well. And so being able to sort of facilitate that conversation to enable that to happen. But I think there is that certainly within the UK, that kind of sort of pressure within those early year settings around kind of staffing ratios, training, all of that kind of thing.
That's great. And do you think that it's difficult for people to recognise their own sort of hang-ups, or the things that they are doing within their own sort of self-regulation or their own practice that are having that impact on the group of children that they're working with, or even the colleagues that they're working with? We've all worked with people who make us feel awful during the course of our day because of their demeanour or the way that they approach situations or deal with something that's difficult. Is that something that you both find is hard for people to sort of either recognise or to maybe admit to, that they might be having an impact on other people's behaviour or the way that other people interact with them?
I think that's hard for all of us, really. When you're in the moment, it's hard to be able to see what's happening sometimes. And this is, the one thing I really like about the piece, or the triple P for parents, is that there are elements in there that identify the traps that people are falling into that are really common. And a lot of times when people are seeing that on video and it's somebody else doing it, it's easier to identify with yourself on what traps you might be falling into that you hadn't previously been aware of. Sometimes it's just from drift from how you would have typically done things, and other times it might be something that you thought was being effective that actually is not very effective and might accidentally be reinforcing the behavior that you don't want to see.
I think as Shawna mentions there, I think it's kind of those, I think you use the word accidental, and I sort of suggest that, those that work within the early years sector, or even the children and families sector on a broader level, we don't do it for the money. We do it because we want to make a positive difference, and because we love working with children and families. And I think, as Shawna says, that sort of practice can affect us all. And I think that's one of the beauties, certainly with the Peace Programme, in terms of working within early years settings, is that element of being able to sort of reflect and kind of look at your own practice and look at how that might be different, or how that might continue to be the same because it's having a positive effect. I think providing that opportunity, that space, that safe space, and that mindset to be able to sort of self-reflect and to create an environment within which you can do that with others as well. So creating that safe environment that actually you can work with colleagues, work with your peers to actually kind of look at kind of how you're working, what effect that might be having, and how that might change or stay the same, as I say, if it's having a good effect. And I think it's just creating those safe working environments within those settings to allow that to happen.
Excellent, thanks. And we've mentioned a couple of times the Triple P programme and the Peace programme, but we haven't told anybody what they are yet. So I just want to make sure that people do know what it is that we're talking about. So I don't know whether you want to explain one each, or whether one of you just wants to give me a quick rundown of what Triple P is and what PEACE is and sort of who they're for?
Shall I do the Triple P one, Shawna? And
Sure, and then I can.
Yeah, and we'll so essentially, Triple P is one of the most effective and most well-known evidence-based parenting programs. It was developed from the University of Queensland 35 years ago, and it's kind of a system, if you like, that's broadly a number of programs. I think there's around 24 different programs now within the Triple P system. That's a range of support that's available to parents either on a one-to-one basis, available to parents on a group basis, or indeed online. So we've now got Triple P Online, which offers that sort of support as well. Essentially, the sort of programs are split on sort of 5 levels. So if you imagine a triangle, and at the base of that triangle, you've got level 1, which is essentially kind of a real breadth of reach, a more universal approach, if you like, to parenting support, and that's really looking at dispelling some of those myths around parenting, like I was talking about earlier, around kind of it's okay to ask for support, it's okay to receive support around parenting, and kind of just making parenting support okay. And as you go up that sort of triangle up to the peak, as it were, the intensity and focus of those programs focuses more on in levels of intensity. So you've got level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, and so that really goes from that communication strategy of the parents okay right through to seminars where you're talking about broad parenting strategies, broad parenting issues to a larger number of people, through to more focused discussion groups or one-to-one about just a more focused kind of 1 or 2 different behaviours that the parents might need support with. Is that fair, Shawna, in a nutshell?
Yeah, I think that's a good trial. And the whole premise, as you've mentioned before, Andrew, the whole premise of the Triple P system relies on that self-regulatory or minimal sufficiency approach. So it recognizes that parents do have the capacity to make leadership changes in their home that they see as most appropriate. And so it draws from parents' knowledge and skills and expertise to be able to help them to reach the goals that they're seeking to attain. And so to complement that is the PEACE program, or the Positive Early Childhood Education program. And the PEACE program is designed, it's recognizing that children often spend more waking moments with their early learning and care providers than they do with their parents, particularly at young ages. And so they play an important role in helping to support the child and the child's development, and in complementing positive parenting practices. And so seeking to have consistency between home and education, the PEACE program is designed to help give strategies and skills to the early learning staff that they can use in their classroom to help promote the positive development of the children and help to navigate situations that they find difficult, but also that will complement what the parents are doing at home. So there's different ways people can access the PEACE program. They can either do it individually, where it would be one staff who is working through the online modules. So there's 4 one-hour online modules that they have access to, and as they work through the exercises, there's videos and self-reflection exercises and some opportunities to grow your own professional development throughout and recognize what's working and what's not working in your work setting. And people are answering the questions. It's populating a resource guide or a book for themselves that they can then download and print and keep afterwards. The other way to be able to access peace is through a team approach, where multiple people would be participating in the online program, but also somebody usually in a leadership role, so a supervisor, director, or a consultant who supports the early learning environment would train as a peace coach. And similarly to what's happening with the parents, where the practitioner would work with the parent and help to coach through setting their goals and reflecting on elements for success and for change. The peace coach would do the same. So they would go into the childcare classroom, they would do an observation and meet with the staff afterwards to debrief on what's going well and what do they wish to change and how do they use their own strategies and knowledge to be able to enact that change. And then the third way to be able to access peace is what we refer to as community peace, and that's where there's the peace coach, the team piece that all the staff are participating in and getting formalized coaching, but also including the parent element, so providing access to the parents to Triple P in a way or approach that suits them, whether it's the online program that Andrew had mentioned, or whether it's through providing groups or providing one-on-one support, basically building that connection or that bridge between home and school so that there's consistency in the language and the approaches that are being used.
That's brilliant, and that's really interesting, Shawna, that you talk about that sort of bridge and that bit, making sure that there is a relationship between what's going on in a setting and what's going on at home. I think that's one of the things that practitioners often struggle with, is that they can do amazing work with a child and bring a child on through lots of different parts of their development, but then at the end of the day they lose them to home, and maybe some of those bad habits or those things that they're not so keen on seeing within children's behaviour comes back with them the next day. And it can be difficult to marry those two things together. I think especially because a lot of the time practitioners don't get a lot of time to spend with parents, because parents are busy and they'll just drop their children off on a morning and pick them up on a night time and don't necessarily have time to stay and have an in-depth conversation or a sort of a proper handover of what's gone on during that day with that child, to be able to continue those practices at home. Do either of you have any tips for practitioners within nursery settings or childminders who are trying to bring parents along on that journey with the children in terms of how they can build those better relationships and instill some of those practices in a child's home life, in terms of showing parents the benefit of some of those things or explaining how they work?
One of the things that I've noticed in the research I've done with peace is twofold. One is that often when things are not going as smoothly as they would like, staff sometimes see the parent as part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And so an example of that would be when I was doing interviews with early learning providers and asking them to describe for me some of the experiences with children that they find challenging. Often it would result in people responding about comments about the parents or what's happening in the home environment and how that's made things difficult in their work environment. And after they had participated in the peace program, when I asked that same question, they shifted the way they were talking about the parents to be thinking about the parents as partners and resources. And so I think in the absence of having a lot of time to be able to meet and talk with the parents, sometimes the trap that people fall into is they wait until problems arise before seeking to build that relationship in a meaningful way. So, for example, that's when they're calling the parent in to sit and talk with them, or making the phone call to the parent at work, or doing the communication, is when things are arising, when we really need to preventatively build that strength in the relationship before the problems arise, so that the parent is hearing the things that are going well as well. And can help them to reinforce some of those positive experiences with the staff rather than waiting until being reactive. The flip side also is that sometimes parents don't engage for a number of reasons to parenting support opportunities. And So I think that the staff need to also then model the value of that ongoing development. And so we talked earlier about the value of professional development ongoing, but specifically what I'm thinking here is the role that it has in destigmatizing and normalizing accessing support. And so when we've got staff who are working through their own professional development and learning and having some aha moments of things that they might do differently, it provides an opportunity for parents to see that even professionals are looking for ongoing growth, and this isn't as easy as it sometimes feels it should be. Children are changing and growing every moment of every day, and their needs and the way we respond to them are often changing just as quickly. So when staff are using some strategies that then they can link in the parents, it just normalizes that experience overall.
And thanks to you at home or on the go for joining us. Don't forget, if you've got some best practice or you'd like to share with us something great, you can get in touch with us at alumni@cache.org.uk. That's alumni, ALUMNI, at cache, CACHE for echo.org.uk, and we'd love to speak to you. You can find us at the CACHE Alumni website at www.cachealumni.org.uk, or through the main CACHE website for information about qualifications and other CPD at www.cacheforecho.org.uk. Thanks very much, and until next time, take care.